Good morning. Hey, we just finished a series on women's and men's hormones and how they affect sexual wellness and consequently our relationships. We thought we'd sort of wrap up this series by talking about natural ways that we can sort of boost our sex hormones and our overall hormones as well as our wellness. Today, our guest is Thomas Seager. He's PhD. If you followed any cold plunge, ice bathing stuff on Instagram, he's the guy that I love to follow. We'll certainly be putting his links in there. I'm a little bit excited to just get his story, to hear his take on how he got into this practice of iced bathing. And just for a little context, original research was done in Norway, and I can't say her name, but it was actually called winter swimming. Was the first way that they did this. They kind of did some original research. That was the sort of the in the, I guess in the scientific world, we call that the seminal paper or the seminal book, like the first thing that started this whole conversation. There's a lot of people doing research. Dr. Seager's doing amazing research when it comes to this. So I'd like to introduce him. We'll just tell us a little bit of your story. Like, how did you get from being where you are with your education, which is not necessarily a medical education, but definitely scientific process. And how did you apply your knowledge of the scientific process to kind of why you wanted to work into, researching this and digging into this? Because it's a really great story. You guys pay attention. You're going to have a fun ride with this one.
You're on the right track here, Robert. I'm an engineer. I was trained as an environmental engineer. My doctorate is in civil and environmental engineering. And environmental engineering has always been concerned with public health. But I had moved into sustainability and efficiency and then resilience and infrastructure and disaster response. Right now, there's an enormous hurricane moving through the Caribbean. It's the earliest of any season that we know of. And those kinds of things can feel quite threatening. And so my career had matured to the point where I was doing infrastructure resilience. And I discovered that it's not in the concrete, and it's not in the steel, and it's not in the things that I studied when I was a doctoral student. Resilience resides in the human creative response. It resides in how we respond to the crisis or the catastrophe or the stress event or whatever. The more I got into infrastructure resilience, the more I had to get into human psychology and what would steer us towards what I call a shock response, sort of a dysfunctional, maladaptive response that makes things worse, or a resilient response, a creative adaptation of our belief systems and our understanding and our behavior that can turn what would be a stress event into a growth event. But my career has taken a big turn, and that was mostly because of it was because of the lockdowns. It was when they took my classroom away. It was when they were telling me that I wasn't allowed to speak as a scientist. It was when we were censoring other quite sensible voices on Twitter and social media and other places. And it was when the media in the United States wrote me up, so to speak, pilloried me on NPR and the San Francisco Chronicle as some kind of a COVID-denying faculty member. This was when I decided that I wanted to change what I was doing and focus more on public health and less on buildings and roads and dams. So I started writing about ice baths because the mission of Morozco, the mission of my scientific career, is now to give people the knowledge and equipment they need to choose their own health. The sentiment in the United States, I'd say in Canada as well, and probably in many countries, the sentiment has changed. It used to be my parents thought that the doctors were in charge of their health, that I got a condition, I got to go to my physician. And that's not the case anymore. People no longer trust the institutions of public health. And so we have sort of individual health. But they need knowledge, they need equipment, they need to be connected to one another to discover what works. And my first experience of that sort of underlying mistrust came when I was a doctoral student. I had 3 kids was married, and my son, who was 6 years old, was sick. This was around Christmas break. I had just defended my dissertation. And my wife called our pediatrician, who was also our neighbor. We were living in northern New York. And she's describing his systems. And our pediatrician said, well, it sounds like there's a flu going around, and get him some rest. My wife said, and he's peeing the bed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
And our pediatrician said, meet me in the hospital right away. Your son has diabetes and your life is going to change. My wife didn't tell me that part of the conversation because she was in shock. That was a surprise to her. Talking about human resilience, we went over to the hospital and they took my son away from me, and nobody really explained what was going on, but they knew that they needed to test his blood and test his urine, and they admitted him to the pediatric ICU. Then John, our pediatrician, he caught up with me to fill me in on what was happening. He had an orange and a syringe. And he said, no one is leaving this hospital until you figure this out. Because this was before continuous glucose monitors, and this was before insulin pumps. And so in that moment, it felt like, and probably justifiably so, it felt like my son's life was in my hands. And in this case, it was a good thing I did not have the disadvantage of medical school or trained nutrition programs or dietitians, because I had an engineering problem. I had to measure his blood sugar. I had to dose his insulin, and I had to inject him 2 or 3 times a day at that stage. I took scrupulous records of everything he ate, all of his exercise, everything, all of his insulin dosages, so that I could attack this like the scientist I was trained to be and figure it out. And I discovered that what the dietitians and the nutritionists and many of the endocrinologists were telling us just wasn't true. The American Diabetes Association was giving us advice that was making my son sicker instead of healthier, that we were going to have to figure this out ourselves. And that was the backdrop in which I entered these COVID lockdowns. It was sort of a background, a context of mistrust of the medical experts, of the public health policy institutions, of these associations of physicians that had already been captured by the pharmaceutical companies and the cigarette companies that bought the processed food companies. It's that skepticism that has motivated me to talk to more people, to gather my own data, to go to the library, to figure out, how does metabolism work? How does our immune system work? How do my hormones work? And the book that you were talking about, Uncommon Cold, it's got something like 600 scientific citations in it. Jay Bhattacharya told me, Tom, there's too many footnotes. And I'm saying, Jay, I'm not taking the footnotes out. This is, to me, essential, or I'll forget where I found these studies. But it also has stories. And the stories are more important because they motivate people. Nobody ever picked up a graph and changed their life. It is the stories that make sense of the science. And so we need the studies that explain the mechanisms of how people have really made change, but it is the stories that people relate to. So one of those stories is mine. I had a scare. It was a health scare, we'll call it. I was separated from my wife. I'd lost a lot of weight. I was trying to get myself, back in shape. I was going to go out on the dating market, and I had all my blood work done, and my prostate-specific antigen came back too high. And I hadn't anticipated anything like this. Even though I was in my early 50s, and I guess this is very common, I didn't know. So I go to Google, I go to WebMD, all the usual places, and my imagination is telling me that I'm going to die of prostate cancer. I'm not saying that I was going to die. I didn't have a diagnosis. I'm saying that when you immerse yourself, when you start thinking about all these things, the human mind has a tendency to catastrophize. And that's what mine was doing. So I talked to other men, some of them younger, some of them older than me. It seemed like everybody had a prostate story, and none of them were good. The biopsies weren't good. The prostatectomies weren't good. And I was in this state of mind where I was convinced if I went to a medical doctor or a urologist, I would start a cascade of events that would result in a removal of my prostate and a lifetime of erectile dysfunction, and then what woman was ever going to love me? I was in that panic state. And instead of starting that chain of medical events, I decided I was going to do anything else. I was going to do ketosis. I was going to do ice baths. I was going to see if I could get this inflammation down and fix myself metabolically. I got my PSA down to 1.
There's the number. Yeah.
So that felt great, right? It was whatever the lab report says, less than 4 is normal. And by that time I started thinking, maybe I don't want to be normal. Maybe normal for a 53-year-old guy. Maybe that's not where I want to be. But I was getting my male health panel, and so testosterone is right on the panel. And my testosterone went through the roof. So this is one of the examples of an N=1 study. This is what happened to me. And I don't care how many doctors on Twitter tell me that there is no randomized, double-blind, gold standard trial of whatever that says the thing that happened to me actually happened to me. Like, this is my experience and it cannot be denied. So I did an article. Turns out there's this study in Japan, Sakamoto et al., and they had measured testosterone levels in young men who do ice bath after exercise. Just like everybody knows, your high school track coach tells you to do. Testosterone and luteinizing hormone went down. And for some reason, they reversed it. They said, well, now we're going to do the ice bath or cold stimulation. It wasn't even a whole bath. They were just immersing one hand or one arm from the elbow down. And then they did the exercise after the cold, and testosterone and luteinizing hormone went up. I wrote this article, little N=1. Here's a funny thing that happened to me, and here's how I think it happened. And nobody read it because Google hates us. You can barely find Morozko Forge online. But Joe Rogan found it. And when Joe Rogan read it to David Goggins, I'll never forget, it was December of 2022. And he put my picture up and he, read my Instagram post about what happened to my testosterone. And my phone blew up and people were saying, hey, Tom, you're on the Joe Rogan show. And I'm like, hang on, I think I would be the first person to know, and I've never been on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, but he cited my work. And now I get messages from men all over the world who are saying, I think you found the cure for low T, and this is what I did. And now I'm up to 700. And do you think I can go higher and things? This aggregation of experience, what worked for you? Maybe I could try that and see if it works for me. This is where scientific hypotheses are supposed to come from. These unusual, inexplicable experiences should be stimulating the creativity in the scientific mind that says, how do we design a trial that may decode the mechanisms of what people are reporting to us? For goodness sakes, that's how Viagra was developed. It wasn't an erectile dysfunction drug. It was for heart congestion. They would open up the blood vessels. And the men in the clinical trial were reporting to the supervising physicians, they were saying, well, how's your blood pressure and how's your circulation and all these kind of things. And you're writing off their checklists. And the men were like, hey, doc, can I maybe talk to you about something? Because ever since I entered this trial, and the doctors would write that down. And when they sent it back to Pfizer, Pfizer said, I think we're on to something here. They totally repurposed the clinical studies as an erectile dysfunction drug because of what the subjects were reporting to them. We need to do more of listening to those N=1 experiences instead of writing them off because they were not underwritten by a pharmaceutical company. So that's sort of how I got here, Robert.
No, I love that story. And when we look at we talk about just having a basis in science. So, I have my degrees in science as well. And we understand the scientific method. And I love the fact that even though, you're classically trained as an engineer, that doesn't mean that we don't understand how to read research. It doesn't mean that we don't know how to read a study and then say, I wonder if the information in this study might apply to me. So yeah, I think there's a big movement about, and whether or not there's going to be a randomized clinical control trial or a Cochrane study or a Cochrane review of all the information, I think there may be as more people start to work on these things. But I love the feedback that you're getting. I love just even the fact that you're checking your own data. I love the one post you put up. Your doctor, you sent your lab work to your urologist, and he said possibly on testosterone supplementation or something like that, because there's just no way to believe that a man of your age has a free testosterone, total testosterone numbers as high as yours were, based on just what you were doing. So he's like, I just don't believe it. You have to be doing something else that you're not telling me about.
That was sent to me by a reader. That wasn't actually my result. It was sort of replicating my experience, because when I finally went to the urologist, I have my PSA report, and I'm like, I'm out of the woods now. I can go book the appointment. And he's gonna give me a big pat on the back and congratulate me, and he's gonna say, Professor Seager, what did you do? I should change how I treat every patient, because I'm also prone to these kinds of fantasies, these sort of self-aggrandizing, look at what I've discovered. And my urologist said, I want to do one more test. I said, what should we do? I had no idea, Robert, what luteinizing hormone was, because it's not part of the usual panel. But he wrote me, a order, and I got to go to the lab and get blood drawn, and then I got to look it up. Luteinizing hormone signals the gonads to produce the testosterone. And I figured out later that my urologist was looking at this report, and he's about my age, and he's saying, no frickin' way. This Seager's juicing. He wasn't treating my prostate in the least. He was treating his own skepticism. And when my luteinizing hormone came back, and it's through the roof, little red triangle, out of range, too high, I sent it to him. I never heard from that guy again. And in a way, I can't blame him. I wish he'd say, what are you doing? But he's not going to change anything. There's no class in medical school that says, and this is when you prescribe ice baths, and this is how you dose an ice bath. What am I expecting? The medical profession to just turn around how they practice medicine because I had such a good experience? Patients, people who should never be patients, have to do this for themselves. So it is my job to write the articles and say, here's something you could try for yourself, to provide the equipment that says, here's something that could empower you to do it, so that they can run their own N=1 experiments. And then many of them, will screenshot something or text me and say, this is what's happening. And I'll repost it in the hope that it helps other people take charge of their health too.
Well, and I think the world is just so different today in the way that we're able to interact now that we have so much through social media, different ways for us to be able to connect with each other all over the world. It's not like we're just in our little tribe, our little community, and listening to one expert. And so this has been such an incredible way for us all to have our own N1 experience and share those N1 experiences all around the world. We wouldn't have found ice baths, which Robert and I do. We'll talk a little bit about that. We do at least 3 times a week, if not every day. And I don't think we would have ever even attempted that had we not had experiences and seen other people's personal experiences.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think as I get older, and especially as we're on this topic, I became interested in the side benefits. I think at first it was more about emotional regulation and stability and some inner resilience. I think that's really what drove me to it. And I can tell you that just from that perspective of it, I'm a much calmer individual when I work on my daily ice bath. Just because of my, it's dose response and dose response and dose response and learning how to manage myself. And then I get older and, I'm getting my blood work as well. And I'm like, there's got to be something on the natural side. And then of course I do exactly what you did. I dug into your research. I dig into the winter swimming research, and I'm like, okay, what's here? What's the optimal dosing? And I know that I saw a presentation that you did when people ask you what the optimal dosing is, but we can probably ask that question as well. But and there is no optimal dosing. There's no optimal temperature, and they're like, okay, well, somebody's got to get to this. And we have special forces that are doing deliberate cold exposure, over in the Eastern Bloc, and getting similar results by just having people stand outside with their shirt off. None of which I actually prefer to do. And cold showers in the morning, which I feel like just ruins my favorite part of the day. So I can't do a cold shower in the morning, but I can my favorite part of the day is to wake up in the warm shower, not not to make it cold. And maybe I'll grow up and become stronger emotionally one of these days. But
we don't need to, though. We've got our ice bath.
Yeah, I don't feel like it. So
well,
doing that part.
I have to say, and I have to jump in here because for those who think that, you have to be some sort of superhuman to get into 38-degree cold water or 40-degree cold water, I hate the cold. I hate being cold like nobody else. I mean, we moved from San Diego, which is perfect. When we go on vacation, one of my criteria is it has to be 77 degrees all the time when we go on vacation. We came from San Diego. We moved to Utah. We live in the mountains now. My deal with Robert is during the winter, I have to get away 1 week out of every four. Once a month, if you don't get me out of here for a week, I am going to lose it. I hate being cold. And yet I see the benefits and I get into 38-degree water almost every single day for 3 to 4 minutes. So even me I feel like my feet are always cold. My hands are always cold. I always run cold. Like I see the benefit and I do it.
Let's think about that cold shower. They make me angry. Like I started with cold showers and, I wanted to toughen up and I'm divorced and I'm thinking about all my own faults and all the shame that's associated with, I don't even want to call it a failed marriage, but the end of my marriage. And I'm like, well, I'm going to get in the cold shower. It's going to make me tougher. And it just made me angry. And then I got in the ice bath and it was a completely different experience. The whole body up to the neck with the chunks floating around my neck. And this calm came over me. And I said, that's what I want to do. It was a couple of years later that I discovered a study done from Finland. And some of the best work on cold water therapy has been done like near the Arctic Circle by these Finnish researchers. They did partial versus whole body. And there are a lot of things that are the same. You activate the sympathetic nervous system. You can create this fight or flight response when you do partial. And it's also sort of the first 15 to 30 seconds of your whole body experience. But in the whole body, this parasympathetic, the dive reflex takes over. Your heart rate goes down. You have a calming effect. And you never get that second part, that dive reflex, in the cold shower. Heart rate stayed up in their subject, and they never felt the calming sort of meditative brain state that I get in the ice bath. The cold showers are stimulating and there's no calming stage. But go a little bit further about how much we love our warm showers. And it occurred to me, as a civil engineer, hot running water is only like 100 years old. Like when did my grandparents install, the hot water heater? When did they get plumbing in their house? And for them, it must have been something like when I remember my dad came home with a color TV. We forget how fast technology changes. And the luxury of a warm shower is not something that my grandparents could take for granted. But me as a kid, I've never known anything else. Our evolutionary experience as human beings is with cold water. Even in San Diego, you can go to Coronado Island and they'll have a little chalkboard on the lifeguard station and they'll say, water temperature 62 degrees and there won't be anybody in the surf. And I get there and I'm like, oh, well, I guess it's up to 62 and it'll be boring, but I guess I can go play in the waves now because
I guess I'll sit here for 10 minutes instead to try and get a little bit more effect out of it. Yeah.
Right. Let's get a little of this heat out because I'm cold acclimated, just like my grandfather was. But he did it without having to do it intentionally or without having it been, if he was cold, it was because he had no choice. Me, now that I live in Phoenix, Arizona, I have to remind myself, I have to make it a habit to seek the cold to which my body is evolutionarily adapted. Without cold exposure, I would lose all my brown fat. My hormones would become dysregulated. My metabolism would become dysregulated because the body is not getting the thing it needs to stay healthy. And that's true of exercise. That's true of sunshine. Our bodies are tuned for an evolutionary environment that is 250,000 years old. And here with our modern infrastructure and our, heated leather seats, that's only a couple of decades old. It's no wonder we're maladapted to it.
Yeah. So I want to get to resilience because I think for sure we have to talk about that, because resilience and the parasympathetic nervous system response and being able to regulate our responses is absolutely critical in relationships. But before we do that, you just mentioned brown fat and hormones. And I'd love for you to take a second to just talk about what brown fat is and what it has to do with hormones.
Well, Robert was alluding to it. If I've got this correct, you're talking about Susanna Soberg's work, and she's in Denmark at the University of Copenhagen. She did a dissertation on brown fat. And it didn't used to be that you could do this, because medical doctors believed that brown fat was something that only existed in childhood, and then adults sort of grew out of it. There was a team in Sweden that called that belief into question. And this goes back to something like 2007. So it's not very old. They started looking at these PET scans, which are used to detect cancer. You inject a radioactive tracer into the body. It's attached to glucose. The glucose is preferentially uptaken by tumor cells, and then you can image the tumor cells using PET. These Swedish researchers were noticing on some scans these symmetrical spots. Because they were symmetrical in the body, they knew it wasn't cancer, because cancer is so abnormal, it's asymmetrical. And they said, we think that might be brown fat. In some of these instrument rooms, the PET scanning machine, uses a lot of power, it generates a lot of heat. And so some of these instrument rooms were kept cool. And some of the cancer patients that were coming in for their scan felt a little cold. And some of them in Sweden had brown fat that was activated during their scan. So the Swedes put out this paper and said, we think that there is brown fat in some adults. And then the Sloan Kettering Cancer Institute said, I think we better go look at some of our PET scans. And they scanned thousands of them. And sure enough, fewer than 5% of the adults in their scan, they did show brown fat. The medical belief system changed. They said there can be brown fat in adults. And now you can get a dissertation just in brown fat by studying, where does it come from? What does it do? How do you maintain it? And what Sobor found out is that winter swimmers in Denmark, because they have this Scandinavian tradition of jumping in the fjord and going back and forth with the sauna, winter swimmers in Denmark have brown fat. And so she asked them, how often do you winter swim? And they said, 2-3 times a week. And she said, well, how, cold is it when you go in? Well, I like going in November and January and whatever, about 4 degrees C, this water. She said, well, how long do you stay in? The average exposure time was 11 minutes a week. So what does that say? 11 minutes a week of whole body cold water swimming is sufficient to maintain brown fat in an adult human being. It doesn't say what the optimal is. It doesn't say what the minimum effective dose is. All it says is that there were these subjects in Denmark who did it, and they averaged 11, and that seemed to work. Well, this is wonderful, because brown fat is not just for cold thermogenesis. It's packed with mitochondria. It will produce heat in the cold. And that is its primary responsibility, is to keep you warm without shivering. But it is also an essential secretory organ. There's a number of different thyroid hormones, for example, and brown fat will convert the inactive forms to the more active form, because brown fat and the thyroid are in constant communication to regulate your metabolism. If you've lost all your brown fat because you live in Florida or you live in Arizona or you live in Texas and you never get cold, then there's nothing communicating, modulating your thyroid function. It's no wonder your thyroid gets out of whack. Brown fat will also secrete neuroprotective factors and hormones that keep your brain in good shape. And so cold exposure will arrest cognitive decline in Alzheimer's patients. It will improve brain function. It will help infants who are injured during childbirth because of a lack of oxygen to the brain. It will help them recover. It will help vets with traumatic brain injury recover their brain function. So brown fat is not just for cold. When it's absent from the body, you are missing this essential secretory function, and you get out of whack. We're meant to be a little bit cold some of the time. And when that's absent from our lives for decades, we become more susceptible to what most medical doctors think are the diseases of aging. These are optional. Everything that we associate with age, as I'm discovering, is really a gradual decline in mitochondrial function. You take care of your mitochondria, and your mitochondria are going to take care of you. Brown fat and cold exposure are one of the best ways to stimulate what's called mitogenesis, to rejuvenate your mitochondria and fix your metabolism. So I'm glad you asked. It's the kind of thing you can't see, but when you start a regular practice of cold exposure, you will notice that you're not as uncomfortable in the cold anymore. You're acclimated to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, it's all these things that you were just talking about spun me off in a whole different direction. And we talk about, and Charlotte's going to bring me back. But just as we think about what you mentioned earlier, our evolutionary, just the way that we were built, right? Not without hot showers. Most of us had to take, like your grandparents, my great-parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. I mean, if they wanted to take a bath, either they heated the water or they went into the creek, right? And sometimes, heating water actually takes tools. You got to have a pot to heat the water in and dump it in this thing, right? So when we look at just the health and the wellness of and the fortitude of our evolutionary progenitors, they had to take cold water baths, unless of course they lived in Iceland and they found one of those, volcano pools. What are they called?
Mm-hmm.
It escapes me for some reason right now.
A geothermal
pool, right? But the rest of the time, cold exposure, taking a bath a couple times a week, we can see how we're built for cold, but because they had to do that, they were protected from a lot of the diseases and maladies that we have because of the brown fat. I think this is going to be my new mantra when I'm cold plunging. That first 5 seconds, I'm going to like brown fat, brown fat, brown fat. Let's go.
Well, it is interesting though, because when we first started, we started with just one of those little things that looks like a trash can, and we went and got the ice, and then it was great when it was winter because it would stay cold.
Yeah,
but as soon as it was summer, it was like, there's not enough ice in the world. We have to every day fill this thing up with ice. This is a pain. But back when we started it, it was miserable the first few times we did it. I don't think I ever got to a place of being comfortable in it. And then slowly I was like, oh, I actually, it took me maybe 30 seconds, but now I'm actually okay here. And then it was less, and then it was less. And I was like, now, sure, like the first 5 seconds or so is still shocking when you get in. But then, last night we usually do it after work rather than the morning. I'm not brave enough to do it in the morning just yet. But, we got in together. We have a big tub and we get in together, and then there's that woo. And then we sat there and had a conversation for 5 minutes, and we're talking, and we're not, wincing and trying to run away from it. And that has built so much, I think, resilience. I mean, that's the thing for me that I feel like I get energy. I feel like I've napped. When I haven't had a nap, I feel alert. I feel focused. But I feel like if I can do that, then why can't I manage using my breath? Why can't I manage my reactions with other people, with Robert, with people that I meet that irritate me? Like, if I can apply that to the rest of my life, then I can be more resilient everywhere.
I think you're on the right track. The resilience is your adaptive response, not the stress event, but how you respond to the stress. And when you remind yourself, for example, that you have choices, you can choose to respond one way or you can choose to respond another way. When you lift that response up to a conscious level, now you can choose constructive responses. I'm not saying you always have to. I mean, sometimes there will be people, and I'll tell my staff, no, they're no longer allowed to be a customer. We're firing that customer. We're not going to deal with them. We're not going to communicate them. We're cutting them off. Because it's just not constructive. That's a choice that we make. Another choice would say, well, let's understand the problem that this customer is trying to solve. And how have we failed to help them solve it? Different response. The second one that I'm talking about is where I like to spend, say, 80% of my time. Because most people are, I'm going to generalize, but most people are good people. That is, they're mostly honest. They're mostly trying to do things like work on problems in their life, trying to make things better. And yet, when they feel anxious or insecure, they lose track of the choices that they have in their response. So I'll give you an example from a conversation I had with our service department. And a customer was close to abusive. And those are sometimes the people that we'll put them on a 24-hour timeout, and then we'll see if we can go back and re-engage. But in this case, I said, this customer doesn't really want a refund. They're afraid that they're being ripped off. And when someone is in that state of fear and loss of control, they will grasp for control. They will say, well, I must be more emotionally expressive. I must create ultimatums. When they regain confidence that we're not ripping them off, then they'll be more creative and they'll be more constructive. And so let's see if we can provide them with that reassurance. Gosh, Robert, Charlotte, 80% of the time, that's exactly it. People, this is a crazy industry. You can go on Instagram and there are now 100 cold plunge companies all selling the exact same chiller that hooks into an inflatable tub or a plastic tub or something like that. And they're all saying, this is the most incredible, innovative revolution in technology, which is exactly the same thing that if you scroll up, you're going to see from another company. And it's all crap. The business practices in this industry are exploitive, and the customers now have an anxiety about buying. I sell a $24,000 ice bath, and they're going to buy this online. They are entitled to be skeptical and sometimes anxious. So when that activates us, one of the things that I sometimes remind our people is nothing bad has happened. You got an email, you got a phone call, nothing bad has happened. Let's sort out the problem that they're working on. And it's often an emotional problem of anxiety. And let's see if we can solve it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of my favorite quotes, and we say it on the podcast all the time, and I think it gets attributed to Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he says, between stimulus and response, there's that space. And in that space is where we get to choose. And that's our power and that's our freedom. And we remind ourselves of that all the time. And certainly when we move into the world of relationships and marriage and helping couples, no one is going to trigger you the way that your spouse does. You're with them all the time. There's a lot of pressure on the marital system. And we forget that space exists. We forget that they have different values and dreams than us, that we're two different people. And we sometimes see them as a threat because maybe their perspective is different from our perspective. And then we get into we talk about on the podcast all the time, the Gottman research, every predictor for divorce, contempt, criticism, defensiveness, negative conflict, flooding, emotional flooding. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. All of those predictors for divorce all come down to emotional intelligence. And if we can develop that emotional resilience to take that space, then we can prevent all of those things from happening in our conflicts, and we can be a lot more at peace. And I think that's what for sure, the thing that we do with ice bathing, we've seen that has helped us to respond to each other and remember to take that space.
I think that the cold plunge increases that space for me. Instead of the window for that opportunity to respond being a millisecond, being able to cold plunge gives me a lot more time to consider my response because I'm not as fast on that. I think the cold plunge just increases that space between stimulus and response, at least in me.
I see that in you, actually. That's a good point. I think it does too. So
we love doing things together. If you see our Instagram, we're always together. We're just attached at the hip. And it's funny because, we had a smaller ice bath, and I just got a bigger one because first I was in and then she was in, and we were cheerleading each other initially, come on, you can do it, And now I love the bigger unit. I love being able to be there with her. And there's a long list of hormones that are released when you plunge, but And I know that I think that you've talked about it. You did have one experience. Just there is one story, I think, when you were doing a photo shoot, I think with your girlfriend at the time. Just share that with us, and I think we've already shared ours. But I love your perspective on that.
We were in the middle of a big argument, and there's a video. We can't even look at each other, but we're doing a photo shoot. And my daughter, who was a student in digital media at ASU at the time, she's the photographer, and we kind of can't back out. Like, we drove all the way up to Sedona. We're running out of sunlight, and we've been procrastinating, and we really kind of ruined the shoot with our procrastination because now the shadows are terrible. And and my daughter's like, well, it's time, man. You can see I'm going like, I can't believe I did this. And she won't even look at me. But we take one another's hand and we step into the tub, and the ice and the water goes everywhere. And we breathe like we're told to breathe. And we look into one another's eyes. And you can see her anger soften. And then she giggles. And then she smiles. And then she leans in, and we're making out in the ice bath. And my daughter's like, cut, we got it. That's the end of the shoot. And it felt like we were back in love. So I had to explain that, like, what's going on? First of all, eye contact is an intimate thing. And if you can maintain it, it's going to change your feelings. It's going to create a sense of attachment, of connection. The breathing in unison is another thing that brings people into harmony. But in that moment, the activation of our sympathetic nervous system, it sort of creates a salient experience. And unbeknownst to me at the time, it created a flood of neurotransmitters and hormones and brain chemicals that simulate the feelings of being in love. Helen Fisher, she's an anthropologist and a psychologist and a consultant to Match.com. And she wrote that there are 3 brain systems of love. There's sort of the love that you can have for a family member. This is attachment love, or for a child, or for a pet even. There is lust. And there's romantic love, the crush that you would feel on somebody. And these 3 can exist independent or all at once. The presence of one does not imply the presence of the others. And they are all associated with different neurochemical profiles. So attachment, oxytocin, vasopressin, lust, dopamine, testosterone, the feeling of the crush, that sort of jealous, possessive, romantic love, norepinephrine. All of these are stimulated when you get into the ice bath. So here, AJ and I, we're getting in and we're doing some of the somatic stuff, like staring into one another's eyes and breathing together. And it takes 30 or 45 seconds for the noradrenaline to hit our brain. Now, in me, because I'm a male, I have to exercise to get the testosterone. But women don't have to exercise. They will get an immediate testosterone boost. And because that is the libido hormone, that is the love hormone, all of a sudden, she's activating all 3 brain systems. I've got at least 2. Plus, we're in bathing suits. So I'm probably getting my little, testosterone lust boost as well. We couldn't help. It's like a love potion. We couldn't help but feel back in love in that moment. Now, that doesn't mean that we are going to ride off into the sunset together. It just means that it worked a hell of a lot better for resolving a conflict and dissipating all the resentment that comes with it than some sort of talk therapy counseling session would have been. I think Gottman wrote that communication is one of the greatest misconceptions of the relationship. There are some things that are not solved by, better communication. Sometimes they're solved by doing things together instead of talking about those things. So, I'm glad you're having this experience. I haven't talked to many other people who have shared it, and I want to ask you, what's your approach when you go in together? How does it work, and how do you feel?
You or me?
I don't know. You go.
Me?
And then,
okay. Yeah. So
you'll stimulate my conversation.
Our going in together is fairly new. Up until fairly recently, we had a smaller unit and just recently upgraded. It is just so much more fun together. Like, it is something that I would say in the past, it's always been for me personally, because I've struggled with getting myself cold. The 10 minutes before I would get into the ice bath were the hardest for me. Not actually being in it. It was convincing myself to get in there. And now I feel like because we do it together, it's way more exciting. And I look forward to it more than I did before. So that's new. I also love that we can, like you said, kind of look at each other and gaze into each other's eyes a little bit. Sometimes we sing, or we'll have music playing and we'll sing. But you just feel confident in us, I guess is how I feel. We, I don't know that we've ever gone in when we were fighting. We'll have to try that. We don't.
That's a good point. Yeah, I haven't thought about that.
We don't fight like we used to. And let me tell you, it used to be really ugly before we learned how to be good partners. But, of course, we still have conflict. We've just learned how to manage it differently. But I want to try it when we're fighting and see what happens.
Yeah, when we're unhappy. I'm just worried you might hold me under.
No.
No, I like the, I love all those things. And Tom, I love just your explanation of when you're gazing into each other's eyes. Like, I think that's part of it. For me, I think it takes a lot of, from a guy's perspective, I think it takes a lot of inner strength to look at this person that you love and watch them in discomfort. And from a guy's perspective, we want to fix, right? But I know that there's a calming effect when I look into her eyes and I'm sort of giving her the confidence, because I know she dislikes cold. And I'm looking in her eyes and I'm like, I'm here. We're right here. We're going to get through this. Because for me, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to get in. I'm going to take a couple of deep breaths. I'm going to box breathe. I'm going to blow out that stress and it's going to be there. And for her, she struggles with it maybe a millisecond longer than me. If sometimes, I think yesterday she was acclimated before I was, but I think she was giving me strength the other day. But I think, so we feed off each other's strength until that initial fight or flight, even that diving reflex, until that's gone. And then we start to settle into it. And then I find that initial rush of just all these hormones hits your system. My brain thinks differently. I start to ask different questions when we're there. Like all the things like, oh, I got to go mow the grass. And, we had funny story. We were having some power issues recently. And we had a brownout, and I thought it had actually killed our electric vehicle charger because it wasn't working. And so that was on my mind when we went in to the cold plunge, and like all of that left me. I wasn't thinking about all the problems that I had of the day.
Yes.
I was just thinking about like, what are we doing and how are you feeling and connecting. And certainly those love hormones, we have this flood of emotion and we start to care for one another differently. And I think that caring part has been there. And I like doing things together. Some people would say you like suffering together, but I think that's part of it. But that's been our practice. And, I'm mindful of my prostate health. I'm mindful of my testosterone numbers. I'm jealous that I think even you had a user who sent you, she had a twofold increase in salivary testosterone, like minute 1, minute 2 in women. Like, I'm mindful of the fact that she can get an amazing testosterone boost just by doing cold plunge. So for the girls out there, if you want to activate your metabolism and you want to get a little increase in testosterone, it's great. For the guys, got a cold plunge and then exercise. The research has shown that and Tom mentioned that earlier, the research has shown that the reverse is not true.
But hold on, before you do that.
I'm off onto some other my favorite topics. Go.
I know, but I want to back up with what you just said, because that was something I want to pause with for a second. When what you said was you described just being present.
Oh, yep.
And there's so much power in being present. And when you get into that water, there's nothing else to do but be present. Like, you can't not be present. You have to focus on your breath. You have to focus on the now. And you're right. I hadn't really thought about that before. What's happening tomorrow and what happened yesterday doesn't matter. And we don't spend enough time in that place of being present. And you're right. That's what I love about it. Maybe that's the number one thing I love about it.
I said something profound. Wow.
Nothing will bring you to your present moment like being neck deep in ice water.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I tease.
Whatever those anxieties, I think Viktor Frankl was the one who coined the term anticipatory anxiety. It exists in the future. And that means it exists only in your imagination. There's no data from the future. There's only what's going on in your imagination. And you're anxious about things that haven't happened. So the difference sometimes between fear is this is present moment and there's a threat and it's immediate. And anxiety is, but something could happen in the future that maybe anxiety, we are evolutionarily wired for it to try and anticipate and avoid risky situations. And yet we live in such an abstract world of, what is money and the mortgage and the electric vehicle charger. These things are all very unnatural. They exist. The way they work is in our imagination. And so our imagination kind of goes off and catastrophizes about things. And then you get in the cold water and your brain is busy. It no longer has the energy left to catastrophize about things that haven't happened. It's like, wait a second, we are right here, right now, and more urgent things are happening. It lets the water take your worries away, at least for this moment when you're in there, and for several minutes as you're rewarming afterwards, you are free of those sort of anticipatory concerns. And that's one of the things I like about it.
So did we cover sex hormones enough? Do you feel like, because we're wrapping up this series that we just did on sex hormones, do we want to get into any more stories or specifics on how it can help couples in relationships with sex hormones?
I don't know. I think we did all right. I mean, the main ones really are.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the women. We'll dwell on that for a minute because my N=1 study, is as a man, and when Joe Rogan quotes it, he's got a predominantly male audience, and so I do my Instagram demographics, and 80% of the people who follow me are men. But 2 weeks ago, I got two messages. One was from a 60-year-old woman who has had a complete hysterectomy and I forget how to say, but her ovaries removed. So an oophorectomy or something like this. She doesn't have ovaries, and this puts her at risk of low testosterone. A lot of women who move into menopause, of course, their ovarian function declines. And the ovaries, they produce about a third of the total testosterone in a woman's body. The rest is produced in fat cells, adrenal glands, and skin cells. So this woman, her doctor had her on a low-dose testosterone replacement therapy. And the problem is there are no FDA-approved protocols for treating low testosterone in women. So any clinician who has a woman who presents with low T has to adapt a male protocol to the female function, and that can be a little tricky. And so this woman was monitoring her testosterone all the time so that she could adjust her doses. She started doing ice baths, and her testosterone went up by a factor of 10. She visited her endocrinologist, and the endocrinologist said, we got to get you off this TRT. And for a second, they were like, how could that possibly happen? And then it occurred to me. Testosterone in women is produced in the adrenal glands, the fat cells, and the skin cells. What better way to stimulate your adrenals, your fat, and your skin than getting in the ice bath? She doesn't need to exercise. In women, because testosterone levels are much lower, a little boost from these periphery, these secondary sources of testosterone can make a big difference. She's off the TRT. We'll do another follow-up in another 6 weeks or so to see how she's doing. And by coincidence, another woman sent me her labs, and this is the woman that you were citing, Robert, who had almost doubled her testosterone. But she was in a different context. She said, oh, no, I didn't get a very big boost. I saw your post about the woman who got that huge, 10x boost. But me, I only went up 0.5, and I'm forgetting, like nanomoles per liter. The units in the United Kingdom are different. And because the units are smaller, she thought there wasn't a very big boost. But she went from 0.6 to 1.1. And she's not menopausal, right? She's a healthy early 30s woman. The only thing she changed was ice baths, and that's an enormous boost. So what we're discovering is that there is the potential for doing, because her estrogen, in both cases, their estrogen went up as well, and it makes sense. There's potential for hormone balancing in women without TRT, without having to adapt a male protocol to the female body, simply by activating these secondary sources of testosterone in the female body, the fat cells, the skin cells, the adrenal glands. And the best way to investigate that is to get your labs done, do some ice baths, go back about 6 weeks later and see if your levels have improved.
Yeah. I just had my blood drawn yesterday, so I'll keep you posted. Yeah, and that is the only way.
That sounds great. We need more women willing to share.
Yeah. What about men, real quick? Just a couple quick experiences of what you're seeing in men who consistently 3 to 4 times a week ice bathe.
Huberman was on the Mark Bell Power podcast a couple of years ago, and Mark Bell is famous for taking testosterone and doing a documentary about it. So, of course, I had to talk about it. And Huberman said, no man has ever voluntarily come off of TRT. And I think what he was getting at is this. A man who is in low testosterone, he feels like crap all the time. He's got no energy. He's got no competitiveness. He's got no confidence. And after he gets hormone replacement therapy, after he gets this exogenous testosterone, all of that changes. He feels better about himself. He feels more energetic. He gets out on the couch. He's ready to compete again. He's got more confidence. And the men that I've talked to don't ever want to take the chance that they would go back to that low T state again. It is such a bad, dark place to be that I think what Huberman is saying is nobody ever risks it. So there are 2 guys that contacted me and said, oh, Professor Seager, I'm doing your protocol and my testosterone levels are doing great. Oh, what are they? And one guy said 1360. And I'm like, oh, well, that's the highest that I've seen yet. He goes, yeah, well, I'm on TRT and that got me up to about 700. But then I started doing, and now I'm up to, over 1300. I'm like, well, are you going to give up the TRT? And he goes, well, he feels great. So another guy, over 1500, and he doesn't want to give up his TRT either. There's something that goes on in a man's mind that I can relate to. Those feelings of low T, they are an existential crisis. The emotions are, why am I even here on this earth? For a man, they say women are tough. They do childbirth. They can take pain. But when a man has, let's say, a separated shoulder, there's something biological in his mind. It's not the pain of the joint. It's the fear of being unable to perform, being the fear of losing his woman, being unable to protect his family, being unable to provide. It is an existential thing for a man that a woman wouldn't necessarily feel. And low T is like that. Men begin to question, why are they even on this earth? And I don't blame them for never wanting to go back there. But I'm still trying to talk one of these guys at 1300, 1500 to give up his TRT and just give it a minute, just for 3 months, see if 1100 works for you. And maybe that's selfish of me. Maybe I'm, because I'm the scientist and I want the data. They're doing great. And I would never want them to diminish the confidence and the feelings that they have about themselves now.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'd love to just figure it out. I think my labs are due soon, so I'll let you know how these things are working. I'll be sending those off because I want to just track it just a little bit more because we started to become more consistent with it these days.
So I think before we wrap up, a couple of questions I'm assuming people are going to have is how to do it. Okay, so we have to get into cold water somehow. What temperature? How long? Those basic questions everyone has. And then after that, maybe we wrap up, talk a little bit about who should and who shouldn't. Is there anyone who shouldn't do cold exposure?
All right, let's take it in that order. Huberman has a book you can pre-order. It's called Protocols. Huberman and I, sometimes I get the impression we're very different people because Huberman will say, do this, follow these instructions. And he would probably say that's a starting point, What's the optimal? What's the best? And I just can't get my head around that. I'm terrible with instructions. And so Robert said it earlier, there is no one optimal way. This is true. It depends on age and stage and what are you working on. So there are different ways to do it depending upon what problem you're trying to solve. And that does not negate the Huberman instructions, because people have to start somewhere. Ben Greenfield has this video on YouTube, and I don't know, it's been watched like 2 million times, and it's called How to Take a Cold Shower. And when I know Ben's a friend and he's an affiliate for Morozco, but I'm like, what a ridiculous video. But people need to know. And I'm the worst in this regard. So I'm going to tell you about one way to get started without saying that this is the best. I do 2 to 3 minutes a day, and I do it every day. When I started, I did like the Wim Hof breath work and all that. And I found the breath work was boring and it didn't add anything to my experience. I got in and I told myself that I am being watched by all of my imaginary subjects. And before you say, oh my God, Professor Z, he's a pathological narcissist, what I'm doing is I'm creating a character in my mind. And in psychology, this would be called social evaluation. I imagine that I am surrounded by all of my imaginary subjects, but you can choose your children or something. And I say, how do I want to appear to my royal subjects? I want to display for them grace and poise. And so I get in. Joe Rogan will say, you got to kill your inner bitch and you got to get in there, but me, I want to find my inner king. And I'll say, aha, I am going to pretend to be confident in myself. This social evaluation is a trick that I play in my mind that motivates me to be braver and more courageous than I really am. And people do this on Instagram too. One of the things that motivates Joe, he posted in January, he was like, there is no part of me that wants to do this right now. And there were flurries in Austin where he lives and it was cold. He said, but that's why I'm going to do it. Once you set the camera up, you no longer are, imagining an audience. You have an audience. In psychology, there's something called the cold pressor test. You put the non-dominant hand into a bowl of ice water and you measure the pulse and the stress response. And then there's the socially evaluated cold pressor test. And everyone can keep their hand in the ice water longer when they know they're being observed. So I create this illusion that I'm being observed that motivates me to be more courageous than I really am. I want poise. I get in and I feel the gasp reflex. And sometimes I'm going to let that come. Most of the time, I'm just going in through my nose. I'll start with a deep breath, and then I'll do what Robert does. I'll do box breathing or some kind of structured breathing. I know how long 2 minutes is. I know how long 4 minutes is. Not through a timer, but just because I've done this so much. And I'm between 2 to 4 minutes. And then I get out. And the rewarming with some exercise is really important. My favorite one is the steel mace. And again, this is my imagination. Part of the ice bath is like, before you judge me too harsh, remember that I'm feeling like a little kid who, took like a towel and put it over his, arms and like, I can fly like Superman. I'm pretending to be a superhero in my imagination. So I get out of the ice bath and I feel like a superhero, and I'll pick up my mace and I'll swing it over my head like I'm some kind of a Persian warrior and I'm about to, I'm going to be in the movies or something. And I feel fantastic about myself. I'll do some squats, maybe some curls or push-ups or pull-ups, something like that, just to get the blood flowing back in my body. And then if I can, I'll take a walk. I'll get some sunshine. I can't always do that, but it worked for me great when I used to live closer to campus. It doesn't take a lot of exercise to get this testosterone boost. You don't have to go lift heavy. A brisk walk will do it. Just get the blood flowing back into your limbs. In that Japanese study, they did 20 minutes on a stationary bike. And that was it. So if you have a treadmill or a Peloton or you have stairs in your house, you can go up and down the stairs. That's fine. None of this is optimal. All of this is just sort of, what do I do? It might be a place where someone else can start. If you are naive to cold exposure and you've gone cold enough to gasp, you know that that's the right temperature for you, right? It doesn't have to be any colder when you're starting out. The gas reflex is the indication that you need. And if you go, when you're starting out, long enough to shiver, you know you've been in there long enough. And so this is tune into your own body and not the thermometer and not the clock. How does your body respond? But then after about 2 weeks of doing this every day, you will have recruited brown fat. You won't feel the urge to shiver. You don't have to stay in there 8 minutes until you start shivering. Once you're cold acclimated, cold enough to gasp, and then 2 to 4 minutes is going to be fine. But this shivering thing has a different dimension. When I'm by myself and I don't know, I've just had a fight with AJ, or I'm worried about something at Morozco, because there is nothing worse than entrepreneurship so far in my life. Perhaps that's an exaggeration, but there's a lot of stress that comes with starting something new. And I get into that ice bath and these thoughts are on my mind, even though I'm cold acclimated. When I'm anxious and alone and afraid, the shivering comes on right away. And I let it come, because shivering is one of the ways that you can release stress from your central nervous system before it becomes trauma. The psychologists like Peter Levine might call it trembling. There's a lot of words for it because it's not thermogenic shivering. But I get in there and it activates the shiver response. And sometimes I'm like, good, bring that shivering on. Because that stress, if it isn't released in some somatic way, will accumulate in my body and become a maladaptive trauma response rather than an adaptive sort of eustress, hormetic, like growth response. So I wrote this article, Should I Shiver? And it depends on what you're working on. If you're there for metabolic health, if you're there because you want to recruit brown fat, and this is where Huberman and Soberg will say, end on the cold, have your body, re-warm itself naturally, because that stresses you, better exercise for your metabolism. If you're trying to lose weight or whatever, and it's fine. But if what you're working on is this psychological resilience, and you're feeling that anxiety of being alone or abandoned in your life that I've felt, get in there and shiver that out. You're not there for metabolism anymore. You're there for your mental health. And the shivering will promote the release of the stress before it becomes trapped in some other way in your body that causes ill health. So this is why my students complain that I never, give them clear directions on their homework assignments, because I just sort of lay out some guidelines and then I want them to figure it out. I'm sorry if, what people need is more specific instructions.
I think that was fantastic. And I love the way you used visual rehearsal, what you described as visual rehearsal, because I use that with the clients that I work with all the time to help them to create muscle memory for things that they haven't necessarily done yet. And so I love that you shared that. And I love that you shared about shivering, releasing stress in the body. And I think anyone who, as a woman, who has possibly gone through childbirth can relate to that, because and I think I shared this with you before, every experience that I had with childbirth, we've had 4 children, I went through what I thought was shock, where my body went into a massive shivering, trembling process. And there's no amount of warm blankets that they can bring you that's going to stop that from happening. It's just a body response. And it wasn't until I actually read your article about that I was like, that's what my body was doing. It was releasing the stress and the fear of going through childbirth. And it was, when I was in the process of still being in active labor that it was happening. And I was afraid. It was my body letting that go.
Dozens of women have written to me to tell me the same story. It's an experience of childbirth, and it's either immediately after childbirth or it's an anxious point sort of right before the delivery, and they begin shivering, and it only adds to the anxiety. What's wrong with me? And then people say, oh, she must be cold. It is not thermogenic shivering. It is coming out of the central nervous system. It is release of stress and fear. And not just us, other mammals are wired for this as well. If you suppress the non-thermogenic shivering, then the stress may be realized in your body as trauma, and it's going to be really hard you can resolve it later, but it becomes more difficult to resolve it after the fact, because you experience it like an emotional flashback which only increases the anxiety. And people will retreat, of course, naturally from emotional flashbacks rather than work through them in a way that regains their feeling of control. There's a couple of videos that I've done on PTSD, and it relates to relationships. I'm not sure if you draw on Harville Hendrix' imago theory, the idea that you sort of poured onto a partner that reminds you of an important caregiver that hurt you in some way in childhood. It's pretty popular, even if people don't give it they don't cite Hendrix, or they don't call it imago theory. We are wired as mammals with what is called the compulsion to repeat. So we experience an unresolved stressful event that resides somewhere in our unconscious as trauma, and we will unconsciously recreate the circumstances of that. Animals do it too, in either a playful setting if we're children, or it's play, but it doesn't feel like play when you're an adult. And we'll often do that with a partner. This compulsion to repeat says, I want to recreate the circumstances of the trauma in an experimental way that allows me to grasp for that control. And when I've achieved control, now it's no longer trauma. Leonard Cohen, I think is his name, wrote a book called Playful Parenting about this. And in Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, one of his weakest chapters, it comes at the very end. And he talks about his son was into theater in high school. And when I say it's weak, it means that he has the least sort of medical evidence for this. But it is an improvisational theater therapy. And he's a little bit speculative. And he talks about people who can recreate a traumatic event from a position of control. And when that, even if it's just in their imagination or an improvisational theater setting, when that control is restored, then they have the memory, but it is no longer attached to the emotional flashback, because they're like, if this happens again, I will do this, and I will do this, and I will do this, and I will be fine. The ice bath helps you practice that. You are put into this fight or flight sympathetic nervous system activation, and you remind yourself, I know what to do here. I've been through this before. I'm going to breathe through this thing. I've done 4 minutes. I've done 5 minutes in the past. I'm just going to do 4 or 5 minutes now, and then I'm going to get out and I'm going to feel fantastic.
Yeah. And I totally agree with everything you just said, that the unconscious mind stores all of our memories, our past experiences, and it will sometimes even repress things that were unresolved. But because it causes harm to the body, because the unconscious knows that holding on to these past traumas is actually causing dis-ease within the body, it will continue to present these things back into your life so that you can reconcile. It's for the purpose to be able to reconcile these old traumas. And so you're going to see it again and again. I think it was Deepak Chopra who said something to the effect of, and if you go through 4th grade and you don't get the lessons of 4th grade, you get to repeat 4th grade, right? And so it's the same thing in life. Either we get the lessons or we are going to see them again and again until we get the lessons.
We often wind up trying to control our partners. These are the power struggles in the relationship. And so maybe the agenda that I'm bringing to the relationship is I'm going to I have this compulsion to repeat some traumatic event that I had with my older sister, some sibling rivalry, right? And so I will unconsciously position the woman whom I'm in a relationship with in the role of my older sister, and I will recreate this trauma from a position of control. The problem is that she has to sort of give up control. I'm trying to control her, and she has to behave. Now, if you can do it in an explicit way, if you can role play it out, fantastic. Because the control only has to exist in this playful setting for long enough for your brain to sort of be like, oh, okay, thank God that's over.
It can be imaginary. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And but we don't make these sort of explicit agreements with one another. We play them out in passive aggressive, unconscious ways that lead to resentment of our partners because they have failed to play the role I have in my imagination that will heal my childhood wounds. Damn it.
Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't let me control them for some reason. I don't understand.
Right.
Understand why they didn't want to give up control and play this part that I've never explained to them they're supposed to play. And yet I resent them for not playing the role.
So what about contraindications for ice baths?
Oh, I'm so glad you reminded me. There's a couple things going on here, and none of them are on Instagram. I'm a little angry at some of these social media influencers who say, oh, the ice bath is the dumbest thing you can do. You're going to burn out your adrenals and blah, blah, blah. Because those entertaining distractions are masking the real contraindications to cold plunge therapy. The first one is hypertension. When you get into the ice bath, vasoconstriction shuts off the circulation in your limbs, and it pushes the blood into your core and into your head because that's out of the water. Your blood pressure will go up. If you are already sort of chronically hypertensive and you're going to push your blood pressure up more, it is possible to create in your body an acute hypertensive response that needs immediate attention. You got to get out of the ice bath. You got to restore the circulation in the body, vasodilation rather than vasoconstriction. So the sauna might be good for this. And a couple of people in medical supervisory positions have reported these hypertensive acute attacks in patients that they didn't realize were chronically hypertensive. So high blood pressure is a contraindication. And what do you do about it? Go warmer, start smaller, monitor your blood pressure, because it is a hormetic stress. You just can't let it kill you first. That is, it's good for the circulatory system, but you don't want to be so close to a threshold that you would tip yourself into some sort of acute event. So hypertension is the most important contraindication. And then here's something scary that happens, which isn't as dangerous, but it's just as frightening. It's called transient global amnesia. Sometimes things come up when you're in the ice bath. There's this sympathetic nervous system activation. Your brain and body have built-in defense mechanisms that will automatically respond to that activation. And in about 1 of 20,000 people, one of those responses is transient global amnesia. They lose their memory. And that's such a frightening thing for the person who's experiencing it and the ones around them that love them. But don't forget the transient part. It comes back. And it's not necessarily all the time. And I can't blame anyone who's experienced it for saying, I'm never doing an ice bath again. But I was just meeting with Dr. Mark Cohen. He flew up from Australia and he participated in a workshop. And he said he's got data in Australia that says about 1 in 20,000. If you are one of those, it's very frightening. And in every case that we've seen, the memory does come back. There are some other contraindications that I'm going to say are more minor, but there's a good book on winter swimming by a French gastroenterologist, Nicholas Economidis. And he goes over, he's been doing this in the Mediterranean, winter swimming for, say, 20 years. He says, so these are some of the other things I've seen. One of the things he says is antidepressive medications may be a contraindication. And this is ironic because we just did a panel a couple of days ago of people who were treating major depression with SSRIs and other meds. And they weren't responding the way they wanted. And so they said, I'm going to do cold exposure. And some of them went cold turkey and others are tapering off. And so to say that antidepressive meds are a contraindication might discourage people from experimenting with something that has worked for other people, resolving low mood, anxiety, and depression. But I mention it because there is a physician who says that he's concerned about it. You can read the articles, Dangers of Deliberate Cold Exposure, those kinds of things that I've posted to see some of the summaries of what I would call the minor contraindications. Mike Tipton, University of Portsmouth, he says autonomic conflict is another one. Mike Tipton is concerned with people drowning. These people who, they jump off a cliff into a quarry or something like that. He's not concerned about ice baths so much. And yet Wikipedia has blown up Tipton's hypothesis on autonomic conflict, activating both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic at the same time. And They've said, well, ice baths are so dangerous, you could die. There are no documented cases. No one has found one, not Mike Tipton, not me, not Mark Cohen, of anyone experienced this kind of heart arrhythmia, autonomic conflict thing in an ice bath. Where there have been cases, it's people who like fall off a fishing boat in the Arctic Ocean or something. So one of the ways to mitigate the risks of an ice bath is to ensure that you only go of your own volition. So here's another contraindication: not wanting to do an ice bath. If you don't want to do it, don't let anybody bully you into it or coerce you into it or force you into it. You're never going to see me with a bullhorn or something like that. You go in and out, like you are the king. And nobody gets to tell the king what to do. The king goes in because the king has decided, of your own volition. It's the same thing with kids. Lots of kids are going to be curious, and kids have plenty of brown fat. They're fine. They know when they're cold, And if a kid wants to get in, make sure they're getting in of their own volition and let them get out whenever they're ready to get out.
Yeah, I remember our kids doing things like that when we would go hiking up in the mountains, in the early summer when the water was still glacier, like snow melt, and my daughter saying, I'm going to swim over to the little island out there. I'm like, go for it. If you want to do it, do it. And they can handle that. She loved it. She loved all that. She was so proud of herself.
Yeah, I think there's a way to mitigate. I think there's a way to mitigate these absolute and then, somewhat contraindications for ice bath. And I think really, when people would ask me how I got started, I say, look, the original research really started winter swimming, 59 degrees, 11 minutes a week. Like, that's not that difficult. When we start getting into the 30s, that's really cold. But like, if you want some place to start at 59 to 58 degrees. Most people, actually, you can get that in your bathtub at home. I think in the winter, it'll be about that cold. So like, as a way to try and get into it, you can mitigate it by trying a warmer temperature, just cold enough, right? Initially, 59 degrees, if you haven't had any cold exposure, you're going to be like, whoo, whoo. You'll get that initial gasp reflex. So like, those things will work, and then don't stay in as long. Like, it's dose dependent and temperature and dose dependent. I think that we can mitigate a lot of those things by not trying to just go big. Like, I'm going to go 32 degrees. I'm going to break the ice with my elbow when I get in, kind of a thing.
We discovered that the football players, totally the wrong attitude. They have a lot of experience with whirlpools and ice bath training room. Fred Warner, he's a Utah guy. I think his alma mater is Brigham Young. And he said the same thing you did, Charla, that those 15 minutes before he takes the ice bath are the worst part of the ice bath, because he's kind of looking at it and he's like, oh my God, am I going to do this again? He's got that anticipatory anxiety, and you cannot willpower through, like, the mentality that works in the weight room is not going to work in the ice bath. You got to get in and surrender to it. You have to relax yourself. You can't amp yourself up through it. And I've talked to athlete after athlete who are telling me that.
I love your approach there, Tom, and every once in a while I come up with a thing that I want to save, want to write it down. Like, I open the lid to my ice bath, and my Zen is inside. That's where I find it. I find my Zen on the inside of that ice bath, because whether I'm with Charla or not, I can find this inner peace. And oftentimes that's only found there for me. Mm-hmm. I want to put that on the outside of the door, open for Zen, like right in there.
Love it. Love it.
Put that on Morosco Forge. You can just get a new sticker for that.
When you're ready for Morosco, we'll engrave it on the lid.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. I want to be ready for one. I'm telling you.
So you have a book. So why don't you tell us the name of your book, where people can get it, and how they can find you on social media?
The book is called Uncommon Cold, and people can't get it. I only printed up 300 copies. All the articles, they're all available for free. ASU pays me a salary to be a professor. And so I have this kind of naive, stupid idea that knowledge should be free. But people wanted it all sort of bound up in one volume. And it made sense to me because my mother Alzheimer's is what took her, dementia. And her death was merciful because she was gone to us long before she was actually gone from this earth. And when I visited her, it was about 2 weeks before she died. And people have been asking for this. And I said, oh, all the articles online. I said, I've got to put this in a format that helps people understand. It's a lot of work putting a book together. And AJ edited it. She wrote the foreword. We only printed 300 copies. And I know that it should be on Amazon or whatever, because we thought, well, there's only going to be 300 people in the world who actually, want a copy of it. We're all sold out now, Charlotte. We've got to revise it. We've got to add more. We got to put it on Amazon where people can get it. The exercise of writing it helped burning it into my brain. But right now, it's no longer for sale.
Okay.
So you do have a lot of these articles, a lot of videos on your website. Just tell us what the website is, because that's where I found a lot of your information. I think Charlotte had a really long dentist appointment, and I just spent like 4 hours just watching videos and watching some presentations. So give us the website, and I think it's under resources, I think, right?
The name of the company is called Morozco Forge. And so the website is morozcoforge.com. And for all of you budding entrepreneurs out there, never do this. If we could do it over again, we would have called it besticebathforyou.com, or something that Google would, zero in on. But we wanted a dang metaphor, Robert, because we were like in a poetic mood when me and my former student, Jason, we founded this company. Morozco is the winter wizard of Russian folklore, and so he bestows these magic cold powers on you. And we called it a metaphor, and we said, all right, we're going to build the brand with these articles and media. And we are now the number one result in Google for 4 different misspellings of Morozco. So I don't need, you don't need to write this down. Just go on and give it a shot, and Google will point you towards Morozco Forge. Then you go to the science tab. Almost everybody calls it a blog, and I probably should have called it a blog, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I'm a scientist. I have citations, and I know it's not a peer-reviewed journal article, but these are the science and the experience. These are articles that are rich in knowledge about what is happening to people and the mechanisms that explain how it is happening. So that's where you can also find me on Instagram. I just put one up this morning on memory and the ice bath.
And what's your Instagram handle?
SeagerTP on Instagram. And I'm on Twitter, but I've been in Twitter jail for a long time. Instagram seems more forgiving of my heretical views on health.
Wonderful.
So awesome.
Okay.
Hey, thanks so much for spending your time with us. I was really excited when you agreed to do the podcast, and I love the perception. I love your take on not only health and wellness. And I think if each of us can just learn to find small ways to move the needle when it comes to our health, and we can stack these little pieces together, then now we can move into the later stages of our life. And sometimes you say 50 and, oh wow, I'm almost done. Like, I'm not done at 50. I want 40, 50 more years, and I'm looking for a way to just kind of continue to do that. And your work and your research and all the things that you keep doing, I applaud you for that. And I'm grateful for the scientist that you are, and your scientific approach to not only citing the literature, but saying, I have this piece of literature. What does it mean to me? And then can I do an N of 1 study on myself? And can I get similar results? And if you can, and if you do get those results in your life, then congratulations, you've done it well. Done it well.
Thank you, Robert. This has been a pleasure.
It has been. Thank you so much for being with us. I loved it. Loved the conversation.
Thanks again. I'm sure we'll be contacting you again.
I'll be here.